right, we are back with another episode of Punk Rock Politics. I'm Mitch Maley, joined by Henry Rains this week. Henry, thanks for coming in.
It's great to be back. Although there's no Gen Z panelist here.
I'm the young guy at the table today for the first time, right?
Yeah.
We have Alex Boyce has a date tonight, so he bailed out on us, and Brendan Reagan
gave up this for a date.
They're not that frequent in Alex's social calendar, so they had to take priority.
Sorry, Alex.
And Brendan Reagan has an event at Urbanite Theater in downtown Sarasota, so it's me and Henry Rains today.
I got nothing better than to be with here talking
and
about the news.
I am just fresh back, so we were off last week because I had my second go-round with COVID-19 after having the first dose of the vaccine. So I, in between doses, tested positive after an exposure on the other podcast from a guest that I had. So, but now I've been clear.
No, I checked. I was here about a month ago, and you had either just gone to the VA or getting ready.
I was just about ready to get my first shot. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had my first shot, I think, a week before I had the exposure.
This is a second occurrence of COVID, or the?
Yeah, I had COVID last year too. So now I've had 2 runs of COVID, and I've had, but they were about 13 months apart.
And were you symptomatic on the second COVID?
Not really. It was like I had a day or two where I didn't have a fever, but I was clammy and sluggish. But I had about 7 days after my first shot of vaccine. So I would say that the idea that it reduces your chance of having a harsh case after the first dose bore true with me. Because my ex-wife and my son both got it, and they got pretty nasty cases.
But not at the same time.
Yeah, all from this now. Yeah.
Okay, because I was thinking maybe you got the positive result on a test because you had the vaccine in.
No. So I took it because so Shannon was the first one to come up sick, and she had a J&J shot 4 days before she showed symptoms, and she was hoping it was a delayed response to the.
And you got Pfizer.
I got Pfizer, yeah. So she was hoping it was a delayed response to the vaccine, and but she did go take a test because she had an upcoming surgery, and she tested positive. And then the next day, Sullivan was running a fever. He tested positive. So then I went in, took the test, and I tested positive as well. But like I said, I had by far the mildest symptoms, about a day and a half of just feeling a little bit off.
And how bad were you the first time around a year ago?
Pretty bad. I had a rough 2 weeks. I thought I had pneumonia. Sullivan and I actually both had it at the same time then as well. And we both had pretty bad respiratory bouts.
February, March? Or?
Yeah, late February. So
you might have been one of the first rounds.
I was. In fact, they weren't testing yet at first when I became symptomatic because they said, we've had no known cases here. And then that weekend, the hospital over on 59th Street there.
So it seems
What's
to me.
What's the hospital on 59th? Not Doctor, what's that called?
Say that again?
The hospital on 59th Street.
Blake.
The Medicare guy. Yeah, Blake. So Blake had those like 5 cases that weekend. That was a few days after
brain fog is one of those symptoms too.
Well, did you have COVID at all?
Well, I could, once I knew what street you were saying, I knew what hospital it was. You've been here long enough that
I never remember Blake. I always get it confused with Doctor's Hospital for some reason.
Yes, okay. Well, anyway, it sounds to me like you are a walking proof that all the hoaxes are hoaxes because everything you say is contrary to the way it's supposed to turn out.
What's supposed to turn out? What's contrary?
Well, you're supposed to have the vaccine. You're supposed to. Let me back this up. I got to back this up right to the beginning. So you survived your first case.
Yes.
So the year that followed, that disrupted everybody's life. See, now if I'm one of these people that is the opposite of how I am really, I would say, well, see, we didn't really need to turn our life upside down. Look at him. He's almost as old as Henry, and he survived. And then you get it again. So it's like, see, it's nothing to be worried about. He's a double proof case, including his whole family.
But I did have the first
vaccine,
round of vaccine. Yeah.
And you didn't need to do that.
Well, we don't know, though, because like I said, I had a milder case. But let's talk about this a little bit, because we do have a uptick in cases and positive tests. Now, my understanding from just general virology is what typically happens with a novel virus is as it continues to mutate, it is typical that more contagious but less deadly variants will continuously win out. And it's just on the basic notion that the more deadly ones kill their host, they have a harder time spreading. The higher the symptoms and everything are, the more symptomatic somebody is, the quicker they tend to isolate and not be out spreading it. And then
every disease is every contagious disease is pretty much like that.
Yeah, it follows that general. So that seems to be what we're seeing now, is that we're seeing an uptick in cases, but it's not reflected in hospitalizations. So hospitalizations are remaining fairly stagnant, even as case numbers go up. Now, here's a couple of the big questions, though. So some of the complaints I am hearing, which probably have some legitimacy when you think about it, is the amount of warnings they're giving once you've been vaccinated. And maybe that's out of an abundance of caution, but you're hearing the CDC recommendations of post-vaccination aren't that different from pre-vaccination. They're still saying wear 2 masks. They're still saying socially distance. They're still saying basically do all the things you would do if you hadn't been vaccinated. So my question is, what does this do in terms of vaccine hesitancy?
Well, I don't know what that particular scenario that you said does to vaccine hesitancy, but I know the vaccine hesitancy is widespread, and to me, almost at a level of irrationality. As an anecdotal example, someone I know quite well, Susan, who happens to be the same age as me, works in one of the larger employers in Sarasota, but in her department, in sub-departments, there's about 50 individuals. For the past several months, they've gone 2 weeks remote, 1 week in the office, rotating the people through. Now we're getting to the point where the vaccines are readily available. She's my age, 64, so she's on that same schedule I am, so she'll have her second dose very soon. And in that group of 50, there's only 5 or 6 people that want to have the vaccine.
Really?
And, naturally the older, and 64 is older in a working population, that want to have it. But the others have every excuse that you can say. Well, there's going to be other variations, so why don't I just wait until... But what I wonder, so we get the older people vaccinated, which we've done a pretty good job of. We get the people that want to be vaccinated. And if you're a frontline worker, whether it's the grocery store or whatever, I feel sorry for you if they don't make the customers wear a mask anymore. But within that kind of office environment, if the 30-somethings and the 40-somethings just want to walk around and take their chances getting sick, and you're vaccinated, do you really have much to complain about? I mean...
I don't think so. Let's get to the next question, which is, there still isn't an established understanding of how long the vaccination lasts for. And some of the studies that I've seen suggest that the antibodies might only be strong enough to prevent and actually catching it for as little as 3 months.
I've heard 6 months, but we'll still...
So on the low end is 3, and some of this came out in... I don't remember whether it was Pfizer or Moderna. I think it was Pfizer. And in one of their calls to shareholders, they talked about how frequent the needed boosters would be and how that would be a big profit center for the company. So it becomes a question that what I'm worried about, I guess, is what happens if and when by wintertime, when I think everybody's expecting that we're going to go into this winter sort of back to normal. By fall, the date most likely or most often thrown around I hear is September, October. That's when events and everything of large gatherings and everything are going to. That's a lot of like concerts.
That's when we throw in the towel and say whatever.
Well, and that becomes a question. Do you do that? Do you just
economically, we are going to do that.
That's what I'm saying.
It's predetermined from the corporate suites all the way down to the person trying to get a living.
And is that not the right move, though? I don't disagree with that at that point.
Well, first of all, let's go to the original question. You said, what if it's 3 months? What if it's 6 months? Whatever it is. Well, the 3 months will slow the spread. And if if we incrementally do the right thing, which is a big if we incrementally do the right thing, we're better off than if we don't. Mm-hmm. So you get some improvement, and maybe through the development of our individual immune systems, and we get a little bit better responses. The people that are vaccinated don't transmit. People like you that are a walking COVID virus inhaler, and you shake it off more the second time. Maybe we get this slow grind where it's more like a virus that's in the human population that's in a lot of variations, and we sort of survive through it. And unfortunately, we could have gotten to that point, much more quickly. But instead, we're going to draw this out, just like the spring breakers. We get another surge from the spring breakers. We get another surge after New Year's. We get all these. Nobody can just control themselves. The amount of selfishness that is on display throughout the population is one of the big revelations to me. The amount of people that just don't care about the other person. They get their kid the measles shots because they want them in school and they don't want to have to take care of them. But when it comes to what they want, they don't care if it's for the common good.
And that's the part where I was hoping that the idea of the vaccine, if it couldn't be sold in more altruistic measures, I was hoping the idea of just selling people on, look, we could finally go back to normal if everybody just does this. If everybody just gets the shot, gets over the fears, we could actually have normal life back. And I'm worried that any indication that that's not the case will very quickly get anyone on the fence saying, well, I'm just going to wait then. What's the point? If
you're an athlete and you're the father of a successful teenage athlete, and I look at the people around, and having managed an orthopedic office, see a lot of athletes come through. It's like you got a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, and I'm going to maybe be a little sexist, say young man, filled with testosterone, and he gets an injury, and he gets treated. And the last orthopedic office, we did stem cell therapy, so I know that you get some great response time. But he's a pitcher. He wants to go out and start throwing the ball, and the parents are trying to hold him back. Just wait a little longer. Just wait a little longer, and the long-term outlook is going to be so much better. And they don't have enough self-control, enough ability and discipline to put off either the self-gratification or the self-assuredness or the self-confidence, whatever it is, to just not do the activity. And you look around everywhere in our world today, and you find examples of that walking right next to you in the grocery store.
Yeah, you're seeing a degree. Well, that gets into something else we've talked about several times on the podcast, and that is the British film documentarian Adam Curtis has dedicated much of his work to the idea that we're living in the ultimate age of the self, and that social media has only ramped up what was already a move away from collectivism towards individuality to a degree that was unimaginable a few decades ago. And the idea of everyone's living their best life, everyone's being their best self. Just look at meme culture and read it. It's, that if there's a theme to modern life right now, it is individuality and the importance of self. So it doesn't really surprise me that we're seeing less selflessness than we've seen during other emergencies. If you go back to, any time from, World War II through, the 9/11, there's been so many times in history where you've seen America band together in a way that we proved incapable of, during this pandemic. Now, I do think that let's kind of play Monday morning quarterback and admit that hindsight's always, if not 20/20, at least markedly improved over real time. If we look back, the idea that if we could have shut down harder earlier and kept it very strictly enforced, perhaps we could have fared better. Like, New Zealand might be the case study. Obviously, it's a country, it's much smaller, and the culture is much different and probably easier to do that with. I think we could have done a better job. But then the other part is, I don't think we did a great job in making sensible restrictions the norm. And I think sometimes we shot ourselves in the foot by saying, and so much of it became politicized, and it became tribal, and it became, you're either on team masks or team no masks. You're on team Fauci or team Trump. And it was probably the biggest social identifier of 2020 was how you felt about whether COVID was real or not, or a real threat or not. And when you look at that and you say there was a lot of instances in which we didn't go far enough, there was still a lot of instances where we went too far. There was so many on the left where it was like, no, you have to be for shutting everything down for as long as it takes. And if one person dies, it's one too many. And you're a horrible person if you don't agree with that. And then it's like, well, what about all the other problems? Isn't it fair to look and then say, what about the people who are being wrecked economically? What about the people who are losing their businesses? What about the people that are, addicts and having trouble through this time? Or what about all of the sickness and death that's occurring because of the shutdown of medical procedures and things that were, considered? I think we're going to find, in fact, like I remember one time I have a scar on my hand where I probably needed about 5 stitches. That happened in an accident over COVID. There was no way I was going into the emergency room. I got some liquid stitches at CVS, and it was just, it's the way.
Super glue.
Right. And that old boxing trick, right? But that's just a sort of, small analogy for probably what happened on a really broad scale. There was probably a lot of people that were like, yeah, this feels off, but no way I'm going to see the doctor now. Or I probably won't get in for months, which may have been true as well, because the ethos during a lot of that period was, hey, if you can wait, we got our hands full. So there is some, I think, definite viability to the idea that, yeah, you have to at some point make really hard triage type decisions of, hey, how much death is over here, and then how much death and despair is over here, and we have to balance it. There definitely were some people who were like, no, if you say anything other than COVID's the worst, then, and I don't think that helped.
All right. Well, you just laid out a whole chronology of different items and topics, and I will try and get to the main one. But I have to say, on the selflessness stuff, selflessness stuff, I think one of the biggest signs of that is how that has evolved in our culture, that if you acknowledge the police officer or the nurse or the soldier and you say, thank you for your service, the other half of that is, well, that absolved me from doing any service. Yes, I've done my part. I thanked you for yours. To think about, did we do too much or too little? You have to overcome our united state of amnesia that we have and go back to March. Now, actually, maybe February, because I believe, was it the end of January or February that one of the first cases in the state, if not the U.S., was right in Manatee County in Tampa Bay.
February was the first one in Manatee, yes.
Yeah. So I remember my family was celebrating a birthday in mid-March. Hadn't really gotten too much in the mainstream media or maybe the mainstream consciousness, I should say, because there were stories. There's always stories in the media. You know how the media is. People, you're always searching for something new to talk about, and that was the new thing to talk about, but it isn't always what the people take seriously at the time. And here, not to over-localize this, we have a place called the Shake Pit here in Manatee County that is just crawling with people outdoors, and we went to have hamburgers there. I was like, I don't think this is the best place for us to be. And, my daughter, my 29-year-old daughter, is like, oh, I don't want to live in fear, and all these things. I'm like, yeah, but I don't live in fear either, but I don't want to stand around 100 people shoulder to shoulder. But we did it anyway, and it turned out there weren't that many people there. So, and I, as far as I know, didn't get it. But that I'm just doing that to date of time. The middle of March, nothing had really happened yet as far as, wear your mask. I maybe saw people, elderly people doing gloves and masks at Publix, and I was like, okay, well, I see they're worried, but I'm not worried. I started wearing a mask probably the beginning of April, still not because I was worried, but I looked in the eyes of the elderly people that would look at me coming down the aisle in Publix and see the fear in their eyes. I was like, well, 15 minutes, I can put a mask on. All right. But as far as did we do enough, at that same time in March, a friend of mine who's got family in Germany was sending me links to Twitter threads about what was going on in the Italian hospitals. There were doctors putting that out. And not so much the German hospitals yet, but Italy was really the first. But it was starting to build there. And you could see what was happening if you took the time to look to the strain on the healthcare system. And if you did that, you would start to get the ability to see that even if it's not a danger to me, it can cause the healthcare system to collapse. And we got to watch out for that. So I had a little different perspective going forward from that point on. I also remember in March when the handwriting was on the wall that something was coming down, when I think Illinois was starting to close schools or talking about closing schools. And you could see, and if you watch CNBC, business people were worried about what was coming down. And I said to several people, and they all remember me saying this, which is unusual that anybody remembers what I say, is, man, if 60,000 people don't die from this, we're going to wonder why we put our country through this. That was my, and I thought I was being terribly mercenary and callous to say 60,000 people. That's where I put the sacrifice level at. And it turns out that we should have been so lucky. But yeah, so that was when it became aware to me that we had to do something. Now, as we went forward, we don't have any standardized unifying mandate that comes from the federal government. We have all these states, all these different political calculations. We were talking about some unrelated to this before the show. We have all that going down. And also, there's something else that we like consistency. But the real question you have to ask yourself in almost anything, you gave me a proverb earlier before we started the show. Do you want to be right or do you want to be consistent? Things change and you need to adapt and you need to be willing to change your opinion. So when you say Dr. Fauci, yeah, he shot from the hip and he was given the best advice that he thought at the time, and it changed. And it's still changing as we go. And so many of these people are like, see? Never should have believed it before.
Right.
So
yeah, that's the hard thing. So when you look at that, you say, again, it's a novel virus. And if you go back, a friend of mine who's a physician referred me early in this when I was covering it to some research on the original 1918 Spanish flu. And I'll admit, I didn't even know at that time it wasn't just the Spanish flu. It was the flu. The flu was new. And it was new in terms of us understanding it and knowing what it was. That was the first flu that we were aware of. And influenza followed that same path we talked about, where the initial Spanish flu was incredibly strong. We had completely no ability to fight it off, and it was much more deadly. It's gotten less so. And you look 100 years later, it is still an annual killer, a big one in human demographics. And when you look at a new one coming again, there was every reason to believe that it could have been much, much worse than it proved to be. When you look back on it, yes, a lot of people died, but it also was extremely infectious. So a lot of people got it. The death rate was very low in terms of percentage of the people who got it. And then the people who died were overwhelmingly elderly. In fact, the average age of the person who died from COVID-19 was older than the average age of people. So it's on the way high end. It's not to say that that's anything to sneeze at or not to be taken seriously or precautions shouldn't be taken, but we did think it was going to be worse, and we did think it was going to be much more deadly. They were throwing around numbers like possibly 5% fatality and everything in the very beginning, and it proved to be much, much, much less than that. The thing that I'm probably most disappointed about, Henry, in terms of the national response, was there was never an emphasis put on the mitigating health factors and a national rally cry to America. Here are the things you can do to better protect yourself from being a potential casualty should you catch this disease. We can't be a nation rife with obesity because that's the number one comorbidity factor in people who die from it. We cannot be a nation riddled with type 2 diabetes because that's another very high comorbidity factor. When you look at the American, you're in the healthcare industry, so I'm sure you know this much better than I do, but you look at the indices of type 2 diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, you look at all these things and how much per capita, there's so much higher in our country. Obesity, I believe we still lead the world by quite a bit in. And when you look at all those...
Number one,
right? When you look at all those, it's very disappointing that there wasn't more emphasis, I think, put on that. And put on the other things that we did know, like, for example, the vitamin D deficiency was at least corollary with a lot of the worst cases. So we had a lot of anecdotal evidence that says, hey, it really seems like if you're deficient in vitamin D, and in fact, when I went for my physical just a couple months after having COVID the first time in my life, I came up low on vitamin D. So I started doing 5,000 IUs, every day. And even doing that each day, when I got my blood work done about 3 weeks ago, a year since, it only went up into the normal, middle of the normal range. So, that was something that I don't think there was a big education campaign on. I think every bit as much effort as we put into, hey, you should wear a mask and social distance, I think we should have put into, hey, we got to take better care of ourselves. Alcohol sales skyrocket 300% at one point during the quarantine. They were up. So you look at those things that people are doing in terms of toxicity and how much less capable they are of fighting off a virus. In retrospect, that would be the one thing I would have liked to have seen us do differently. And maybe the thing that I'd like us to focus on now, if we see another surge in the winter, which is being predicted.
As good as those ideas are, I mean, that was never going to happen. That's a constructive plan for health in general.
Right.
And hopefully we will do that. There are a lot of things that would be a whole nother show about the shift in healthcare to outcome-oriented reimbursals and stuff like that. You've talked about it on your show, I'm sure. But I think you know this gentleman, Joe Newman. He's 106 years old.
108.
Oh, yeah. Time flies.
108. I met him when he was 99.
Yeah. He was 106 when I talked to him, I guess, about a year ago about this, because he was around for the Spanish flu, although he's only 5 or 6. And he could remember the guy on the wagon come. I think they were in Des Moines, Iowa, and somebody came around on a wagon and put a quarantine sign on the house across the street, and the young boy there wound up dying from the Spanish flu. And there was this awareness that he had a little bit of awareness at his age. And I said, well, did you get any sense of fear or anything from your parents about what was going on? And he goes, back then, we were afraid of everything. We were afraid of polio. We were afraid. Right. And as much as you can say about the morbidity and the mortality of what we're experiencing with COVID, I think about it. I think about my parents' generation, and I realize that 80% of them were dead 2 years younger than I am now. And it's not that unusual for my peers' family. So we are remarkable in the progress we've made in medicine and how good we have it. And by the other side, the flip side, one of the hardest motivators, whether you're trying to get reelected or you're trying to explain why what you did was the right thing to do, is it could have been worse. If whatever we've done, it could have been worse. It could have been a lot better if we did other things. But we could have been a lot worse. We could be Brazil.
So if we see a much worse surge in the winter, what do you predict is the response from the Biden administration?
Well, by the Biden administration.
Yeah, let's go top down first. So I know that much of this is going to happen at state level, but do you think there'll be a push?
Well, first will be the I use the word loosely, quality. The quality of the surge will be different than the other surges. So we're going to, even in the most recent surges, there's been a lower rate of hospitalization. The mortality rate is coming down. The virulence seems to be going up, and the ease of spreading seems to be going up, or we're getting, too loose in our behavior. I don't know which one that is. So
I think a combination probably of the two.
Unfortunately, almost everybody I talked to, especially in the first 3 quarters of this past year, was the survival rate, the death. The only thing was the death rate, the mortality rate. And now we know that we have these lasting side effects for a high percentage of the people that experience it severely. I think 20 or 30% have neural problems months after the fact. It's not a flu. We know that well now. We know it's a cardiovascular problem. We know how it damages heart tissue and other tissue where there creates clotting and things like that. So the whole treatment and how we deal with it changes. So you're mitigating results. So basically, I guess I say America's open for business. The surge will be here, and we'll be open for business, and we'll try and take care of the people that fall by the wayside.
Can you really blame that from the state approach? You compare 2 warm weather states, California and Florida, and California is still under, I think, the strictest lockdown rules in the country right now, and they're talking about June having a full reopening if they hit certain metrics. But then you compare that to Florida, they haven't fared better number-wise than Florida with all of that economic, catastrophe that was caused by, they are still, there's restaurants at low capacity that only became a thing recently, but you still don't have any kind of live event type stuff indoors or anything there the way that you have here. And in a lot of states. So I don't know that there's a strong argument that the lockdowns are...
Yeah, but you just said the live events, the entertainment events. And I think we saw that just from the ancillary activities with the Super Bowl. And I will predict right now is last weekend's double WrestleMania events. And there were a lot of ancillary events that went all around Tampa. You will see a localized surge in another week and a half there. So they're geographically event-driven mini surges that could have been mitigated, that you could have handled differently. I think, and then the blanket stuff that was done in California that not only hurts the business person and the employee, but there's that psychological weight that it puts on the society in general. That's a hard comparison to make. I would say that you're on the margins of the improvement. Some things you can do well, and some things don't make much of a difference. There was a study about masks, about 2 months ago, which was the first one, because all the other studies about masks have been pre-coronavirus. And it's amazing the confirmation bias of whoever you tell the results to. And I believe, and you probably saw it, so maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it found that it improved or reduced transmission by 10%. Was it 10% or 5%? Did you see that?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say 10%, but even if it was 5%, I will hold the same position. So I tell that to people who are anti-mask, and they say, see what useless is? And I was like, if we can reduce transmission 10%,
that's a big deal. Yeah.
Yes, that lightens up the ICUs. It lightens up the staff that has to treat that. If you can, maybe that's 10% people that didn't die.
Right.
That's a big number. So, we don't know for sure. Hopefully, we improve.
Now, Michigan's seeing a really bad spike right now, and they're saying that the vaccine will not help because it will take their vaccine numbers and how long it will take for the vaccine to have an impact. The CDC recommended this week Michigan go into a circa March of last year type lockdown in the whole state.
And how are the hospital utilizations comparing with the comparable surge in numbers earlier in the year?
They're like back in February, March.
Then you have to deal with the situation as it is. Like I
and
said,
they're
you want to
hoping
be right or
that's
you want to
not
be
a harbinger
consistent.
of what the winter is going to look like everywhere else, being that it was still pretty cold in Michigan up until the last few weeks. So you had winter-like conditions in terms of it. And that was one thing. So two of the things that I noticed was, one, the Florida did not, we suffered the, Memorial Day, July 4th spikes because I thought this was pretty obvious, and I was writing about it at the time. There was one really, really, really big difference between summer of 2018 and summer of 2020, and that was air conditioning. So whereas in 1918, we saw a pretty consistent summer die-off of that Spanish flu, that was at a time when people did everything they could to get outdoors during the brutal summer months over most of the country. Whereas once air conditioning was developed and became common, then particularly in places like Florida, you have the same dynamics in July here that you have in November and February in Michigan. You have people moving en masse into the indoors to suck up that shared circulated air. So I did not have any, optimism that was going to occur. However, I do think we did a really poor job once it became pretty clear that the virus did not spread well at all outdoors in warmer weather. I think we did we used poor judgment in not making that the number one determinant of how things were open. I thought it should have not been like, well, we're going to cram into a little restaurant because that's food, but we're going to close, the brew garden, which is outdoors and open and sells food too, but maybe not 50% of it. Like, that was nonsensical. And, one thing I will tell you is that restaurants became de facto bars anyway. Anybody that was a restaurant was able to sell alcohol. People were just in there partying throughout the summer in Florida. All over town that was happening. So you were essentially doing the thing you were trying to avoid at the expense of the thing that could happen to you. And I don't think we did a good enough job in retrospect. And again, I know this is, you need the wisdom of Solomon to ever get this kind of stuff right. And you have a lot of voices, you have a lot of concern, and everybody wants to err on the side of, not looking like a monster later. But I don't think we considered how important showing common sense in the regulations is to getting public buy-in. Because the moment you have this sort of thing where it's like, wait a minute, so we're allowed to eat indoors, I have to have the mask to come in, but that's literally just to pass the lady at the desk, and then I take it off the whole time, and then I have to put it on again if I walk to the bathroom. Is the air different in different places? Like that?
Well, actually it is.
If you're in a place with shared air conditioning,
you are walking and you are exhaling by other people.
Yes, but when there's 90% of the people, the tables were not.
People.
No, it's just, again.
Oh, come on.
Again, the difference is going to be negligible when you're in a place with ceilings this high, roughly as big as the studio that we're in, which is a typical little restaurant.
Mr. Double COVID,
I'm saying
when
don't
you
go
at your table.
I'm saying don't go at all. I'm not saying don't take the precaution, but I'm saying don't kid anybody in saying that we're all, this place is half full instead of full, and we're all at a table with our masks off, and the air is all going everywhere among us, right? Don't kid ourselves to think that just because we walk to the table with a mask on, that it's.
I think when you're spitting your COVID's not out, you're
not
only
safer
carrying
than
6
an
feet.
outdoor beer garden where we could be eating from a food truck or something. Anyway,
I think that if we had a study and we had the control group with the full restaurant and nobody wears the mask coming in, nobody wears the mask when they walk by somebody else's table.
I think the difference would be negligible.
You'll get it. You'll get a difference. But again, that's not the solution. The real solution, and we got to hope that it's right, it takes us full circle back to where we started, is the vaccines. Because the vaccines are the only thing that I can do to protect myself from your behavior.
Yes.
And because we have learned that other people do not, a large amount of the other people do not care about anybody else themselves or their immediate family, and they're not going to do the right thing for you. So you might as well get the vaccine.
All right, let's go ahead and shift gears here a little bit. Big week going into not a real positive, upbeat episode, but we're going to talk about the police shootings Of course, the big one, news broke this week that Kimberly Potter, the Minnesota police officer who killed Dante Wright during a routine traffic stop, has been charged with manslaughter. So we've got a case where a gentleman was pulled over for a traffic stop. He and his girlfriend are in the car. He gets, they run his license. He has outstanding warrants, and they are going to bring him in for it. They take him outside the vehicle. They cuff him. He decides he's not going to jail. He gets back in the vehicle and tries to drive off. The woman, I believe a 29-year veteran of the force, 20-some-year veteran of the force, who was actually field training another officer that day at that time.
Isn't that what Derek Chauvin was doing when they got George Floyd?
Also field training.
Yeah.
Ironic, isn't it? And she's, if you've seen the video, she calls taser 3 times. She warns for a taser first. He continues to try to drive away. She says, taser, taser, taser. She pulls out her service revolver, shoots him, and basically says, oh, fuck, I just shot him. All right, let's try to unpack this. And this is one of those things that's become a difficult subject matter because you're supposed to have, whether you're on one side or the other, you're supposed to have a certain answer. And this is punk rock politics. We don't play that way, so let's have an open and frank discussion. I don't think for 1 second that this was a racial crime against the Dante Wright. I don't think that it was a racist police officer who murdered a black man because that's what she wanted to do. And that's the way some people are portraying it. I think that's asinine when you watch the video and you see everything about it.
Well, I can't go that far.
Okay.
I can't say there aren't some kind of, let's just say statistically, if the population that you police is a certain either race or ethnicity, you're used to viewing them as a potential criminal in ways that if people that don't come across your path, you won't be. If every senior citizen that came across you pulled their gun out at road rage at you, all of a sudden you'd be inclined to think that senior citizen is packing. Well, that's an extreme example of this. So I'm not ready to say that.
So you're saying that because this is an argument that's often used, is statistically about 50% of all violent crime is committed by black males in the United States.
I'm saying that it is human nature that you will internalize biases that you don't.
No, I've always said that's a fair bias in the sense that I certainly can understand, because the other flip side of that is that if an unarmed black male is shot by a police officer, they're not more likely to be a white police officer. They're actually more likely to be Hispanic or African American that shoot them. So I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I'm not saying there aren't racist cops. Certainly not the argument I'm making. But I'm acknowledging that because, and you can go into all the reasons why black males might commit far more violent crimes than their counterparts. But when that is the data, again, half of the violent crimes in the United States are committed by about 6.5% of the population, the black males, then you, regardless of what color you are as a police officer, you may be biased toward when you pull over a black male thinking there's a greater chance of a violent encounter. I'll certainly.
Right. So I'm not quite sure what we're arguing about then.
No, I'm
not saying she shot because he was black.
Okay.
I'm
she
saying
may have been heightened.
I'm saying her spidey sense tingles greater because he was black, and makes her more jumpy and more anxious.
We also have to
pull
acknowledge
the trigger.
that not only is he black, but then at that point he's also a person refusing to comply. So when you're with an arrest, not with a "would you do this, sir? Would you stop? Would you?" There was nothing voluntary. Can we look in your trunk? He was under arrest for outstanding warrants. So they already knew at this point that he was wanted for criminal activity. So that's going to heighten, I think, more than color, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean, really, that isn't even really the question, is it? I mean, she's been charged with second-degree murder. If she had shot him with the taser, she wouldn't be charged with the murder.
Let's wait until we get to that point. I'm just addressing what you're addressing. So you're saying the spidey senses and the reaction based on color. What I'm saying is, if that was true at the time she got up to the car, I think the idea that they find out he's wanted, okay, in connection with violent crimes, and then, while handcuffed and under arrest, tries to escape back into his vehicle, I think that supersedes anything else that she's seen, including his race up to that point, in terms of whether or not he might be a threat, and causes her thought process to change.
Okay, well, I'm willing to move beyond that explanation, and I'll accept that as just so we can go forward. Because I don't even think that's the question.
Well,
the question is if did she, because it isn't second-degree manslaughter, because I've read a couple different versions of what the charge is. Let's say it's manslaughter. If you were a police officer and you mistake your firearm for your taser and you kill someone, that seems like manslaughter to me.
Yes, that is tremendous negligence at that point. And that's what I think this comes down to, is I think you have a horrific, and I'm not in any way suggesting that because he was a criminal, because he had outstanding warrants, or even because he tried to escape custody after being placed under arrest, I don't think that warrants shooting someone by any means. And I think she absolutely, her negligence in her duty, her dereliction in making what seems like an absurd mistake, granted that it's an indefensible mistake with deadly consequences. That's the real issue, but I don't think it was racially motivated or some sort of hate crime or anything like that. I don't think there's any indication of that. Now, if we see something different, if we find out she belongs to a bunch of right-wing groups or something like that, I think it's one thing. Otherwise, I think it was just an incredibly flagrant degree of incompetence that led to the death of someone who just should have been arrested. And I think she should be charged for that, absolutely. But I think it's a disservice when you take this in and lump it in with other cases where I think there was an obvious or a demonstrable racial component. I don't see that here. And I think that by calling this and saying, well, this man was murdered because he was black, I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. I think that, one, anytime you try to escape police custody, you are taking your life into your hand. Again, not excusing that she thought it was a taser, but you might get shot too. You know what I mean? Even if she didn't think it was the taser, let's take it a different step. And we've seen this before where, like, for example, the one that happened was in Missouri last year where the guy walked back to his, or was that Missouri or Illinois, somewhere in the Midwest?
He had a knife in his hand on that one.
And when you have other cases where, someone once you say you're under arrest and, you then at that point lose your freedom to move at that point. You don't have personal agency at that point. We absolutely, as a society, the police have the right to arrest you and take you into custody. And then you have certain rights that come into play at that point. Once you decide, I'm not going to comply with that order, especially when you have outstanding warrants on you, I think you're taking your life into your hands. And I think he absolutely ran the risk of getting shot because another police officer, let's say it's not an accident with a taser. Let's take a different scenario. It's the same up to that point. And then the officer or an officer on the site sees him get back in the car and thinks he's reaching for a gun and shoots him at that point. Again, these are all reasons why when you're placed under arrest, it's probably an enormous heightening of your danger to try to say no and move and exercise personal agency when you don't have it.
So in your second example, many of us have seen the video where he's holding on to the back of the shirt and the gun is pointed at the person's back. If I'm thinking of the same one, because this is one that was paralyzed, not killed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. People see that and they think, what if he just let the shirt go? And we can say, well, there was a knife. We can say the possibility of a gun somewhere in that car. We can also talk about the children that were in the back seat. And we can also talk about the fact that there were other officers that didn't shoot the individual. So I'm not sure what where we're going on the point. I mean,
listen again. I'm not advocating that level of use of force by any means. I'm not saying that. All right. So let's take it all the way to the other extreme and say they should have just let him drive away, and they've got his address, they've got the tags, they put a warrant out for him, and they try to peacefully
like the black guy at the McDonald's.
Correct. So
here's the solution. Let me just cut through it. Here's the solution. The cops need to start killing more white people. We need to kill more white people.
They actually do. They kill more white people.
Well, they need to do it on camera.
They do, but here,
you're a journalist. Why aren't you putting this out there?
Here's the problem. I do, but here's the problem: is that this narrative isn't always acceptable in some circles. When you point it out and say that actually more unarmed white people are shot by police than black people, and that's not just adjusting. That's adjusting for share of violent crime and for population, but it doesn't make for a sexy news story. Let's turn it over to who was the guy, Michael Reinl. Okay, the guy that was killed, the supposed Antifa member. Okay, there's a case now. We had.
I'm sorry, who are we talking about now?
Mike Reinl, the guy that Trump had the feds sent in after, and he got shot. And there was the initial report. So he was the guy that got in a confrontation with a white nationalist at a protest rally. Okay, he's from Oregon, and the guy had bear spray and some other kind of weapon on him.
Okay.
He claimed it was self-defense. He had an outstanding warrant for shooting this white nationalist during a protest. Okay?
All right.
He did an interview while he was a fugitive with Vice News where he said, "Yes, I did shoot him, but it was self-defense and I had no choice." And they said, "Well, why are you evading being brought in?" And he said, "Because I believe that the police are biased against me as a perceived leftist, and that they're more likely to take the side of the person I shot. And I don't believe that I'll be treated fairly." Now it's coming out that when they did go to take him, and if you remember the big deal that Barr and Trump made out of this about the agents going and killing him, that there was a shootout, that he fired on them, and now it turned out his gun was never fired. It had all 15 in the clip, and the one was never discharged from the chamber. So there was nothing shot, and it seems very likely this was an extrajudicial state killing, state-sanctioned extrajudicial killing, where the State
Was
Department...
this the one in Portland?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that if he was black, the racial component would come into it. So this shows you that I think the racial component only comes into it in that scenario. So
all right.
There's a direct example there where I'm giving that. Well, they need to do more. Well, they murdered that white guy, and it was never made a racial issue.
Well, I submit to you, as the editor of thebrainoftimes.com, if you create a video channel on YouTube of white people being shot by police officers, you will have such viral views that you will finance the expansion of thebrainoftimes.com beyond the palatial house that we have.
I think
now.
there'd be a greater chance that I would get canceled by most of my readership. And again, this gets into those uncomfortable parts. And I can't stress this enough.
I didn't mean under your name.
I can't stress this enough, that I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. I'm not, it exists, it's real, and it's a horrible, horrible problem in our culture and in our country. I'm not saying that black people are not treated unfairly by police quite often. I'm just saying that when you examine the data, it is an unpopular answer, but when you examine it, the idea that there is a systemic problem of police murdering black people in general, it doesn't bear out. That there's actually very, very few there's dozens out of millions of interactions between police and arrests every single year of shootings. You get down to a much lower number when an unarmed person gets shot. It is a very, very rare thing, It happens across racial identities. Black people get shot that way. White people get shot that way. Brown people get shot that way. There is no evidence, and in fact, there's contra-evidence that the most likely scenario is a black person getting shot by a white person. That's one of the least likely scenarios. And then when you look at, now I'm all open to the bias that's then, exists because of the amount of violent crime that's committed by one demographic. And I'm also absolutely open to the discussion and the reality that the socioeconomic impact and everything from the prison industrial complex and the rate at which black people are sentenced at a much higher rate than white people, that they're arrested and convicted for certain low-level crimes, nonviolent crimes, at a much higher rate than white people, they absolutely do not get parity in the judicial system. I will be the first to say that. And then that causes a lot of the socioeconomic problems that lead to a demographic being frustrated, feeling disempowered, and then often, if you look at any demographic from humans down through any animal, that if you take someone and you take them out of control of their own ability to act in their own agency, they tend to become more frustrated and they tend to eventually respond violently toward that. And that's a broad social discussion that I absolutely think we need to have in a nuanced way. And none of that, though, requires that I also have to stand up and say, oh, yeah, and by the way, white cops are murdering black people epidemically, because there's just no evidence that's the case. As unpopular as that is in left circles to say, it's the reality. I'm a data guy. Show me the data that shows it differently. Don't show me case by case and cherry pick it. Show me the data. And I don't think that if you're a white person and you're placed under arrest, now, all the other things in the judicial system, you may fare better at in terms of your sentencing, whether you get charged, whether you get tried, all those things you might, and those are the problems we need to be addressing. But do I think that if you try to flee police custody, you have any less of a chance of possibly winding up dead? And again, not because you should, not because that level of use of force, but I just think that once you get to the point where the person in charge exercises their societal right to detain you and arrest you, and you decide you're not going to participate in that, I think that heightens it to the point where mistakes are absolutely going to happen. That is not the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd case. That is not some of the worst egregious ones that we could talk about, but that is this one and many, many others like it. And if we don't distinguish between that, I think the argument becomes lost outside of that nuance. I think then you give an excuse to say for these ones to bleed over into the really egregious ones. So I think we have to be able to have more honest discussion about this. And that's why I'm comfortable saying I don't see this as a race-driven issue, this particular case. I think it's mass incompetence. I think that the amount of dereliction in her duty was criminal, that someone's dead because of this. But I don't, and I do think because of the demographic things that we talked about violent crime, that she may have brought some bias toward whether he may have been a threat to her. But I also think that's mitigated because I think if that's here, I think way above that is someone who's placed in handcuffs and gets back in their vehicle. I think that sends the bigger signal that, okay, this isn't a friendly situation now where I'm with a non-threatening person that I just have to escort through the judicial process. Now I'm dealing with a potential fugitive, and the mindset when someone's in handcuffs, has warrants for violent crime, and says, I'm not going, and goes to leave, now I don't know what they're capable of. So does that change now my mindset in terms of how I respond and how I have to imagine it does? And again, I'm not justifying what happens next. I'm just saying that it leads me to believe that I don't think it's racial at that point. I think that it's an unfortunate reality of a whole bunch of things that shouldn't happen. The first one being, when you're placed under arrest, do not try to flee back into your vehicle.
I accept your analysis and will not challenge it. And I will go home behind my gated community and sleep well tonight, knowing that it wasn't racial.
Well, again, I would never, ever say that racism is not a massive problem in our society, that it always has been, that it comes from the original sin. But if we get to a point where because someone acknowledges that, that means every individual situation, someone else or Twitter or something has to
Are you talking original sin, slavery, or
Yes.
or biblical
Yes.
original
No,
sin?
I'm sorry, slavery.
Okay.
I'm 13th Amendment, all those things. I'm saying that if we get to the point where Twitter or the woke verse or whatever gets to say, well, that everyone we say that looks, smells, or is anything like that, then we're going to determine it and you're a bad person if you don't agree with it. That's not a society that I want to live in, and that's not one in which I think frank analysis that could be productive can get done. And that's what I worry more about. I think we need to be able to have the hard conversations, and even when they don't comport with our existing worldview going into the situation, I think we have to be open-minded and be able to say, okay, let's look at that. Is this that? I got another one this week. I got where they invoked the same name. So I got several notices from the Tallahassee Community Action Committee about Raheem Reeder. Have you heard this story yet?
Oh, yeah. Did you see the video today that was released?
I did not. Tell us about
Yeah,
that.
that is I don't know if it's all body cam, but it was the Tallahassee Police Department's video of the situation. And it's difficult to watch. It was almost 20 minutes long, and I tried to and I found it was released just a little bit before I was coming here, so I was trying to jump around and just see. And for all the things you said, this would for the deceased person. I mean, everything you said is going to hit even more clearly than on these other ones, and it's on camera. One of the things that struck me, though, about the total video, if someone were to watch it, is one, it's narrated by a police information officer. So naturally you're getting what they want, but you're also getting a better texture than just a raw footage.
Yeah,
so I didn't find that disturbing. They happen to be an African-American
PIO
police information officer, and that could be coincidence or not. So the scenario, and I deliberately did not dwell too much on the actual shooting and the worst of it all, was it starts with this car that has a black driver, a female cousin in the passenger side, the person that's what are we calling the person that's deceased other than
the assailant?
Well, I don't want to call him a victim. Anyway, let's just call him the deceased. and
Raheem Reeder, right?
Yeah, and two other people, or at least there were two other people besides the deceased when the deceased took the car away. So the driver is causing a blockage into a housing complex or apartment complex, and the policeman comes up, and it starts out as just why is your car here and it's causing a problem? And the driver is behaving the way that you would suggest that you behave when you're facing someone that has the power of life and death over you. And he isn't just shucking and jiving. I'm sorry to use but that's all I can think of. It's not doing that kind of stereotypical obsequiousness or submissiveness, but he's just talking to the officer. And there happens to be, as the police information officer called it, a marijuana cigarette on the dashboard. Quite large one, actually. It's hard to miss for the police officer. But anyway, initially he's compliant, and then the officer says, "Do you have any other marijuana in the car?" And the driver, at this point, looks at him a little puzzled. He's still sitting in the car. And he goes, "Like the one on the dashboard." And he looks at the person next to him, and he sort of has a non-answer because I'm projecting now, but I'm thinking he probably doesn't know. He probably doesn't know if there is anything else or everything else in the car, or he's worried that there's something else in the car. But he just gives it like, I don't know, or something. And the officer, does a quick little call for backup because there's going to be a search of this car coming down. And he says, could you please step out of the car? He's compliant. And the officer says, here, please sit. Doesn't make him put his hand. And the driver says, would you like to search me? And he goes, no, that's not necessary. You just come over to my car. Here, sit on the hood of the car and where I can see you. And he waits for his backup to come. And he asks the woman something. I didn't get the exchange, but she hasn't, I wouldn't call her overly emotional or, she's not pleased with the situation, but she's okay. And then you hear something from the male that's in the back. As they get ready to do the search, he asks the woman on the passenger side to sit on the curb. She complies. It's at that time that, as the narration says, and I didn't see it second for second, the deceased individual jumps in the front seat and takes
from the front of the cop car. He comes around, gets in the car, and it's in his car and starts driving.
He comes from the back seat, gets into the driver's seat, and starts to take the car away. Evidently, the keys must have been there. And he almost hits one of the police.
I'm sorry, it was the guy who the original driver got in the car? No,
the driver is where he is supposed to be.
Okay.
The woman is compliant.
So Raheem Reeder is the backseat guy.
Yeah.
Because that's who gets in the car.
And as I understood it, there were two other individuals in the car, maybe children, but I'm not sure. Anyway,
one of them was a kid, yes.
Yeah. So he takes off. And they eventually locate him at a different housing complex. At that time, there is a woman that comes out to the police officer, said, there's a guy taking hostages in the apartment. So, yes, now you got a situation.
Well, he hit one of the police officers driving
away.
Well,
he almost hit him. I don't know if he actually hit him.
All right, the news report, I said.
It could be. It didn't look that way on the video.
Let me put it this way. He told the woman who he took hostage that he hit a cop with a car.
Okay. And then you still
so he goes into the apartment complex. He bangs on one of the doors. He gets his way in.
That isn't on camera.
Okay, this is in the report. He from the witness's testimony. He comes in. They've got a child, a man and a woman are in there. He sees a gun that's loose in the apartment, and he grabs it. And then he gets in a fight with a struggle with the male who was in the apartment complex of the woman he had taken hostage, and eventually jumps out the window of that apartment, and he gets shot after that.
All right, I don't know what happened outside the video.
Got it.
But the video then picks up with the woman coming out and saying, there's got a hostage in there. The front door is open. There's multiple officers that approach the front door. Nothing to be seen. It's a two-story, except a staircase. And they're yelling, get out, with your hands up, etc. And just in a quick aside, there's a dog in the living room that you can see on its bed, about a 40-pound dog, not all pit bull, but, sort of that square head.
Mastiffy looking.
This dog, I don't know if it was just instinct or what. He knew how to comply. The dog puts his head down and puts his paws straight out in front of him. So, the dog is like, I didn't do shit. I didn't do anything. and he knows that the attention isn't on him, and he just stays where he is.
Good boy.
Yes. He should be a training officer. And then they're yelling at him to come down. I don't see exactly how it goes where the deceased jumps out a window. That he has a gun. They shoot him. He continues to hold the gun, and he gets shot again, is the way I saw the video play out. But the gun is obvious. A lot of these details are pretty evident compared to some videos we see where, why are they doing this?
Well, this is what we got the same, so the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, which we get a lot of press releases from, sent us one saying police murdered him, and we're having a rally, and join us for this rally to demand an end to police killings. And this is, again, where when we confuse this to being a racial component, when we confuse this for being, an extrajudicial killing compared to the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd case, I think it does a disservice to the issue because you're going to lose a lot of people who are going to say, hey, man, dude's running around taking hostages in an apartment complex, has a woman by the throat with a gun to her head at one point, and, again, fled and a detained situation. What do you think is going to happen? You're probably going to get shot if you do that. There's a good chance.
And there's probably going to be a committee that's going to raise funds off your death. And as in a show of proverbs, this one would be, never try and change the opinion of someone whose livelihood depends on it. They raise their money by unjust deaths or claiming unjust death, and they're going to do that. And it's sad that it will play out this way, and hopefully the damage will be minimal tonight or whenever they
hopefully. And let's leave it with this. We've got to be a society that can talk. We've got to be a society that can listen, and we cannot retreat right into our boxes and have our minds made up and our answers out as soon as we hear the basic details of who's who. I don't think we're going to solve anything until we start having broader conversations without the fear of expressing a thought and then being judged as a horrible person for thinking differently than someone else.
Well, I don't know if you have other topics, but I have an anecdote of hope that I can leave you with.
Go ahead.
If you don't have anything else. No. Well, I went to one of Manatee's treasures this week, 2 days ago, that I had never been to before. And I know as a father that you like to take Sullivan on these trips. You take him to New Orleans and you go to California. Just fantastic trips. But I bet you have not yet taken him to, and I will compliment you if you do, this treasure we have in Manatee County called the Lena Road Landfill. I went out there 2 days ago. Now, I had been there once before to drop off household hazardous waste, like a computer monitor, some paint, and there's a big warehouse you drive through, and you hand them the stuff on their little cart to take away, and then I guess they find a giant county closet or garage where all the things that people trip over in the garage are kept until they could find something to do with it. Well, I disassembled some big storage cabinets in our garage and big pieces of wood that the community that I have, they charge you if you're going to haul it away. It's an internal waste management kind of thing. So I figured, I've been there before, and I've got a medium-sized SUV. I can fit all my stuff in there, and I'll take it out there. So I proceed to go out there, and I find out, if you've never been, have you been to the Manatee County landfill?
I have, only because I covered the story, and I had to drive out just to get the lay of the land.
How far into it did you go?
I did the whole perimeter on the outside.
So that you've got this beautiful scenic overlook there that's probably one of the highest points of the county.
It is actually the second highest point after Piney Point.
And you don't have to worry about a 20-foot wall of toxic water rolling out onto your vehicles. So that was nice right there. So initially on my way in, I'm more trying to figure out how to get to the place where I got to do this. And 40 years ago, I remember taking an Olds 88 to the Gainesville dump and almost not getting that car out. So that's my main concern then. But the woman that tells me how to get where I got to go says, well, you go follow the signs and just look for the birds. I'm like, okay. Well, I get up on top of this landfill, and I noticed there were a lot of birds out there.
A lot of gulls, yeah.
And I won't do the side story about the guy telling me to take the Santa Fe out into the middle of the landfill with the waste management trucks and But anyway, when I came, then I get to come down from the lookout point, and it's that time that I got an exposure to nature that I have never seen before. Seagulls naturally are at the dump. There's some other birds there that were flocked over to a different side, but there's acreage there on the side of the mound of the landfill. And there were literally, as I was overseeing, 5-10 acres it was shoulder to shoulder seagulls. It was not hundreds, it was at least 2,000 seagulls.
Oh, wow.
All about a foot apart. None flying. Now, for me, growing up in Florida, seagulls have just been beach rats with wings, you know, just in the garbage doing that. These seagulls would go into the garbage, the mounds, get their fill of anything they wanted there, and then come back, would congregate with their other thousands of seagulls. And I thought, I have never seen seagulls in this light. These are 2,000 seagulls that can stand shoulder to shoulder, birds of a feather flocking together in total peace and harmony. And all is because they had learned to not manage to go to McDonald's or the beach and have to fight in some tug of war over a Cheeto, that learning to just live off a mound of waste created peace and harmony. No alpha males, nothing. They just sat there. They didn't think about humans one bit. They weren't subject to the birdism of the human species. And I was like, why can't we be like them? And it's, you know, I said, maybe someday we'll
If
learn
the seagulls can do it, maybe there's
Yes.
hope. We're going to leave it on that. We will see you next Friday. And please check out www.punkrockpolitics.com. We've got some new content up there as well. And we'll see you next week.